Morning in Houston still carried the lingering scent of Arabica coffee. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, glinting across the lobby of the upscale apartment building where Henry and Laura lived. In his 70s, Henry was a former government official once known for his fastidious nature, always proud that he had never grown old in his thinking. Yet lately, what he once took pride in had become a source of unease. His life had grown far too quiet. Every morning, Laura calmly poured tea, sliced fruit, and turned on the news. Henry muttered under his breath, lips curling, "If life goes on like this, I'll turn into a statue." He missed his working days, tense meetings, crushing deadlines. At least back then he felt valued. Now every morning felt the same. No one admired him. No one even argued with him. The thought terrified Henry. One afternoon, while pressing the elevator button down to the lobby, Henry ran into Nina, an elegant, single woman in her late 50s, tall and graceful, with a faint yet refined fragrance. Henry froze for a moment. It had been a long time since his heart had skipped a beat. Nina smiled naturally, unaware that her smile was like an electric current surging through the frayed cables of an elevator about to overload. From that day, Henry began showing unusual changes. He secretly used hair gel, bought a bottle of Successful Man cologne, and most importantly, started practicing yoga with online videos. The sight of a 70-year-old man wobbling in a shoulder stand pose scared Laura's cat so badly it bolted straight under the bed. Laura noticed her husband suddenly dressing much sharper. Gone were the rumpled khakis and creased shirts, replaced by polished leather shoes and crisply ironed shirts, so pristine she half suspected he'd hired a bodyguard just for his collar. Laura, calm yet sharp-witted, simply smiled. Let's see what this old man is up to. She didn't rush to feel jealous or interrogate him. Instead, she chose to watch, like a cat leisurely observing a mouse walking straight into a cheese trap. Meanwhile, George, the seemingly gentle security guard always holding a paper coffee cup, also noticed something unusual. George had admired Nina from afar for a long time. He'd quietly held doors for her when her arms were full, fixed her light bulbs, even delivered her mail personally. And now a new rival appeared. Henry, worldly and experienced, yet clumsy in romance, brimming with a confidence that bordered on ridiculous. George couldn't help but be on alert. Henry launched his full-scale comeback campaign. He took dance lessons, hoping to invite Nina to practice together for fun. He learned to use social media, creating an account just to follow orchid-growing groups, because he'd heard Nina loved orchids. But Henry's efforts often ended in comical disasters. Before the YouTube dance tutorial even loaded, he tripped over his laptop cord. And on social media, he accidentally posted a blurry selfie with the caption, "Looking for a soulmate," publicly visible, which Laura happened to see. Laura said nothing. She simply brewed her tea and occasionally asked casually, "Was yoga tiring today? Did that forward bend hurt your back?" Henry jumped, flustered. You know about that? I'm just exercising, nothing more." Laura's faint smile was enough for Henry to realize that an investigation might be imminent. George, meanwhile, began playing the role of silent spy. Using his position as a guard, he tracked Henry's comings and goings, even pretending to mop the lobby just to watch him. From time to time, George chatted with Nina, joking about how young Mr. Henry's looking these days, both to test the waters and to show his own subtle interest. Nina simply smiled kindly, giving nothing away, leaving both men equally on edge. The string of awkward incidents reached its peak on a Saturday evening. Henry, feeling giddy, texted Nina, "Let's meet tomorrow. I have a surprise for you." But with his aging eyes slightly blurry, he accidentally sent the message to Laura. Laura was watching a movie when her phone buzzed. After reading the message, she nearly choked on her tea. "Let's meet tomorrow. I have a surprise for you." Well, isn't my old man suddenly romantic? She didn't get angry, nor did she confront him on the spot. She put the phone away, smiled faintly, and thought to herself, "All right then, let's see what this surprise is." That night, Henry tossed and turned, thinking about his secret date, while Laura slept peacefully, her face as serene as if she'd just completed an advanced meditation course. George, on night shift, saw Henry pacing nervously through the lobby and made a mental note, "Better keep a close eye on this old fellow." The next morning, Henry woke up early, straightened his collar, sprayed on so much cologne that the cat kept sneezing. He held his phone, eagerly waiting for Nina's reply, unaware that his wife had already read the message the night before. Laura set the breakfast table, watching her husband with an expression both caring and as if she were a scientist studying some peculiar life form. "Going somewhere?" she asked lightly. Group yoga," Henry replied, voice trembling slightly. "Yoga, huh? That's good. Just don't get a cramp." Laura smiled sweetly. Henry broke into a sweat and quickly slipped out the door. Meanwhile, Laura called an old friend, arranging a coffee meetup right in the lobby, exactly at the time Henry planned to see Nina. George stood by the security desk, hiding his grin as he watched both Henry and Laura acting, neither knowing the other was performing too. The plot thickened because Nina had never received any invitation to meet. Henry sent it to the wrong person. She just happened to come down to pick up a package. Henry thought fate had arranged a romantic meeting. Laura appeared on cue to watch the show, while George stood by, ready to intervene if necessary. Henry, nervous and holding a fresh bouquet of roses, approached Nina. Before he could say a word, Laura appeared, feigning surprise. "Oh, who are those flowers for? Or are they for me?" Henry froze, sweat pouring down. George stifled his laughter. Nina politely accepted the flowers as a weekend greeting, and Laura glanced at her husband with eyes that seemed to say, "The play has only just begun, old man." That night, Laura lay on her side with her back to her husband, silent but smiling faintly. Henry, heart-pounding, thought to himself, "I'd better be more careful. But hey, a man at my age deserves to live a little, right?" He had no idea that Laura had already seen through everything. She just hadn't struck back yet. In another corner of the building, George quietly marked another tally in his security log. Henry 1, George 0. But the game has only begun. And so, while Henry thrilled at his second spring, Laura quietly took control of the game. Nina was puzzled by the slightly overzealous attention, and George prepared to play secret bodyguard. One misdirected text had opened the curtain on days as lively as youth. Except instead of candles and roses, everything was lit by security flashlights and life's own mocking laughter. Laura slipped into investigation mode. No shouting, no confrontation, but every sense on full alert. In her 60s, she no longer cared for loud quarrels. She chose the approach of a seasoned warrior: observe, record, and strike at the right moment. Henry, too busy reliving his second youth, never realized he was already under a microscope. The suspicious signs were clear. In the mornings, Henry suddenly went out earlier than usual, claiming it was just for a healthy walk. Yet Laura noticed the scent of cologne lingering on the coat hanging in the closet. In the afternoons, he locked himself in his study, with the sound of tango music seeping through the door, a style Henry used to dismiss as nonsense. Laura noted everything down in a small red notebook labeled simply, "Intelligence." George wasn't about to sit still. The advantage of being a building security guard was knowing exactly who came and went at what time. George quietly marked the hours when Henry came down to the lobby under the pretext of exercising, and noticed they coincided suspiciously with the times Nina usually took her walks or picked up parcels. One afternoon, George even saw Henry waiting in the hallway holding a bouquet of white lilies. But when Nina appeared with a friend, Henry hastily shoved the bouquet into the recycling bin, then pretended to adjust his wristwatch. George almost burst out laughing and quickly turned away to avoid being noticed. Laura began to upgrade her methods. She tried checking her husband's phone while he was in the shower, but Henry had grown cautious and set a new password. Undeterred, Laura casually asked, "Honey, what's the password on your phone? I want to call our daughter." Henry answered without blinking, "I'll call her for you. Don't worry." Laura smiled to herself, thinking, "Guilty conscience, huh?" To test her husband's reactions, Laura staged a few small performances. Once, she wore a blue dress she hadn't touched in years, dabbed on a little old perfume, and went down to the lobby to chat with a newly arrived widowed neighbor. The moment Henry spotted this from afar, he hurried over, awkwardly greeted the man, then dragged Laura home, muttering, "Why are you all dressed up today? Going somewhere?" Laura replied coolly, "I just wanted to freshen up a bit. Or is it that once you're old, you're not allowed to be noticed by anyone?" Henry stayed silent, face flushed, nearly choking on the grapefruit juice he'd just drunk. Meanwhile, Henry kept working hard on his self-improvement campaign to get closer to Nina. He signed up for a dance class at a nearby center, but the very first session was a disaster. When the young instructor told him to step back on 3, Henry stepped straight onto another student's foot and almost fell over. When he got home, he claimed he had slipped on the sidewalk, but Laura easily noticed his shoes were dusty from a wooden dance floor. Henry didn't stop at dancing. He also started learning social media. He asked a cousin to install a messaging app and set up a Facebook account, but instead of sending a private note to Nina, Henry accidentally posted publicly, "Life is beautiful when there's someone you look forward to seeing every day." Relatives and friends quickly flooded the comments. "Who's that, Uncle? Uncle's in love again?" Laura just chuckled when she saw it, while Henry rushed to delete the post. Too late, Laura had already taken a screenshot. Meanwhile, George kept quietly collecting evidence. One evening, pretending to patrol the lobby, he caught Henry awkwardly making a phone call. "Nina? I just wanted to ask, do you like jazz music?" George laughed under his breath, then quickly jotted in his notebook, "Opponent enters direct attack phase." But George wasn't made of stone either. When he chatted with Nina to gather intel, he himself blushed as she thanked him for helping the residents all this time. Laura grew more sophisticated by the day. She noticed every tiny change: a new dark blue shirt appearing in Henry's closet, a few $100s mysteriously missing from his wallet, and strangest of all, he started rehearsing lines in front of the mirror. One afternoon, while arranging flowers in the living room, Laura heard Henry muttering in his study, "Nina, you make my life meaningful." No better. "Nina, even in my old age, my heart still burns with fire." Sounds a bit theatrical. Laura gently cracked the door open and saw Henry standing before the mirror, holding a bouquet as a prop, earnestly practicing lines of affection, his face as serious as if preparing for a major stage role. She almost burst out laughing, but quickly regained composure, softly closing the door as if she had seen nothing. That evening, Laura prepared an abundant dinner, cheerful as if nothing were amiss. "You seem pretty lively these days," she said, her voice full of hidden meaning. Yoga, dancing, makes me feel healthier," Henry replied. "That's great," Laura nodded. "I have a coffee date with an old friend tomorrow. Guess I should freshen up a bit myself." Henry looked up, nearly choking on his soup. "Which friend is that?" "Oh, just someone I've known for years. A very decent man. I think he likes lilies too, just like I do." Henry forced a crooked smile, fumbling with a piece of fish that suddenly tasted like nothing at all. At the same time, George began to slip up. While noting Henry's comings and goings, he carelessly let Laura catch sight of his familiar figure lingering around Nina's door. Laura suddenly understood. It wasn't just her husband who had a scheme. The security guard also had feelings for the charming neighbor. That only made things more interesting for Laura. Now she wasn't just investigating her husband, but also observing this unwitting ally. One afternoon, Laura happened to meet Nina in the elevator and subtly probed, "You must be busy these days. Lots of people dropping by to see you, huh?" Nina laughed. "Oh, just a few friends stopping in for a chat. I guess you've noticed Mr. Henry is quite amusing." Laura smiled sweetly. "Very amusing, so much that he's trying out all sorts of new things." Her trailing words left Nina slightly puzzled, while Laura strolled away with an elegant hint of perfume. A subtle warning in its own right. The next day, Laura prepared a little psychological strike. While Henry was in his study, she deliberately walked past with the phone to her ear, speaking just loudly enough for him to hear. "Yes, see you tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to it," followed by a playful laugh. Henry shot upright, heart pounding. Who's calling her? What man is that? He quietly cracked open the door and saw Laura leisurely stepping onto the balcony, her face glowing with cheer. That evening, Henry was more restless than ever, while Laura calmly read her book, feigning indifference. When Henry tried to fish for information, "Who were you talking to today?" Laura answered naturally, "Just an old friend. Someone who's fond of me. It's been a while since we met." Henry nodded, but inside he burned with jealousy, finally tasting what his wife had been silently enduring. The peak of this elderly intelligence war came one noon when Laura returned home earlier than expected. She stood outside Henry's study and overheard, "Nina, you make me feel young again." No, I should say you make me feel still lovable." Laura gently pushed the door and caught Henry standing before the mirror, adjusting his tie, clutching a fake bouquet as a prop. He was so engrossed in rehearsing his love confession that he didn't even notice his wife right behind him. Laura stifled her laughter, softly closed the door, and went to the kitchen as if nothing had happened. She decided not to expose him just yet. Better to keep silent and strike later. Henry, blissfully unaware, pressed on with his grand plan, while Laura already held all the evidence, turning her investigation into a sly, ironic game. Henry entered a full-blown midlife comeback race. Every morning, he woke up earlier than the birds, dressed in flashy neon workout gear, and carried a gym bag to the condo's fitness center. But after decades of physical hibernation, exercise was no easy feat. On his very first day, Henry tried to copy the young trainer, lying flat to do crunches. By the third attempt, a faint crack sounded in his back, nearly making him cry. Claiming a muscle cramp, he left early and limped home, but Laura took one look and knew. "Back from the gym? Why does your face look like a wrinkled apple?" "Ah, the muscles? They're really growing." Henry bluffed, massaging his hips as he walked. Not only did he hit the gym, Henry also cut out his beloved barbecue, switching to salads and green smoothies. But before any slimmer waistline appeared, his blood pressure dropped from overdoing the diet. Laura quietly cooked him a hot bowl of porridge and placed it on the table, teasing gently, "Love sure makes a man lose weight fast." Henry flushed red, said nothing, and secretly hid the bowl in the kitchen, not wanting Laura to think he'd given up. Laura just smiled and added another line to her intelligence log, "Subject weak in stamina, but highly determined." While Henry flaunted his revival with brand new designer sneakers and an overpowering cologne, George took a different path. Rather than chasing appearances, he focused on small acts of kindness. Carrying Nina's heavy shopping bags, fixing her leaky faucet, quietly watering her flowers each morning. Nina noticed George's patience and quiet care, a sharp contrast to Henry, who was always in a rush to prove himself. Laura watched it all, and at times felt a pang of melancholy. In the quiet afternoons, she thought back to when they were newly married. Henry had no belly then, no complaints about the electric bill, no fear of growing old. They used to walk hand in hand in the rain, eat cheap sandwiches just to save money for a movie. Laura felt both wistful and wryly amused. Back then, he chased me with his heart. Now he's chasing with running shoes. Nina also gradually sensed the mismatch. Henry was always putting on a show, flashing his new watch, inviting Nina to fancy restaurants, yet every time he stood up to pull out a chair, he would clumsily spill a glass of water. George, on the other hand, simply invited Nina for tea in the security room, sharing small, simple stories about the building's residents, about how heavy the snowfall was last winter. One man was chasing a lost youth, the other seeking quiet companionship. And Nina began to see that both were pitiable in their own ways. One evening, Henry proudly showed Laura a brand new pair of running shoes. "Look, these are the lightest kind. They run as smooth as flying." He eagerly put them on, planning to show off a few steps, but tripped over the edge of the carpet and fell hard. Laura rushed to help him up, half worried, half mocking. "I don't see you flying, only making an emergency landing." Henry forced a laugh, but that night he had to ice his knee. George seized the chance to score points with Nina. When he heard her complain about back pain from carrying groceries, George promptly brought over his old recliner and said, "This is great for reading. Takes the pressure off your back." "I don't use it much. You can have it." Nina was touched and thanked him softly. Meanwhile, Henry was busy choosing a tie to match a bouquet of red roses for an important meeting. Laura, with her sharp instincts, sensed Henry was up to something big. She probed, "What have you been so busy whispering on the phone about lately?" "Oh, just discussing business with an old friend," Henry replied, eyes looking away. In truth, Henry was planning a grand confession right in the building lobby. Decorative lights, fresh flowers, romantic music on speakers. He intended to kneel before Nina, hand her a huge bouquet, and deliver the line he had rehearsed hundreds of times in front of the mirror. Little did he know that both Laura and George had already sniffed out something fishy. That night, Henry even hired a young staffer to help with decorations. The normally quiet lobby lit up with balloons and roses scattered along the hallway. Passers-by whispered, "Someone's throwing a birthday party? Looks like Mr. Henry's planning something really romantic." Laura came downstairs, simply dressed but sharp-eyed. George stood nearby with a broom, pretending to sweep but clearly on watch. When Henry appeared in a brand new suit, hair slicked back, both of them were ready to strike. Just as Henry was about to kneel, Laura stepped forward with a sweet smile. "Oh my, what's all this ceremony for? Our wedding anniversary? Why didn't you invite me?" The remark made everyone burst out laughing. Henry flustered, nearly dropping the bouquet. George quickly chimed in, "If it's an anniversary, I'd be honored to serve as master of ceremonies." Nina, standing behind, was both surprised and amused. Henry's face turned crimson, stammering, "No, it's not. I just—" Laura gently took the bouquet from her husband's hand and turned to Nina. "These flowers are beautiful. Would you hold them for me? I'm afraid he'll forget to bring them home." The entire lobby roared with laughter. Henry froze in place, his grand confession plan shattered to pieces. Nina felt both embarrassed and sympathetic, while George quietly celebrated the success of his spoiling mission. That evening, Laura returned home acting as if nothing had happened. Henry silently removed his suit, sat down, feeling both humiliated and bitter. Laura poured him a cup of tea and said softly, but loud enough for him to hear, "You can't buy youth with expensive flowers, you know." The gentle remark pierced his pride like a needle. Henry didn't dare argue. He simply lowered his head and sipped his tea. Outside, George sat in the security room, thinking quietly about both Nina and Laura. And Nina, in her apartment, wondered, why do they need to prove anything so grand? Sincerity is enough. In the middle of the night, the fire alarm blared, wailing like a trumpet of doom. Smoke rose from the basement, acrid with burning plastic. Panicked residents poured into the hallway. Laura barely had time to throw on a robe before spotting Henry standing frozen in the living room, clutching the gift box and the leftover bouquet from his failed confession. "Are you planning to put out the fire with flowers?" Laura snapped, yanking his arm. "No, I'm afraid they'll burn," Henry stammered. The loudspeaker crackled. "All residents evacuate immediately. Do not use the elevators." People crowded the stairwell. Henry missed a step, slipped, and smashed his knee against the railing. Laura gasped, forgetting all quarrels. "Are you hurt? Let me help you." George, on night duty, rushed up to catch Henry, holding him with one arm while signaling to Nina running behind. "Go down quickly. Don't breathe in too much smoke." The smoke grew thicker by the minute. Coughing as they went, they made it down to the ground floor, where the fire alarm blared deafeningly. Fire trucks wailed outside the gate, hoses blasting water in a roar. Amid the chaos, George noticed many elderly people and children panicking. He immediately ran off to help, while Nina rolled up her sleeves to support a trembling old lady outside. Henry suffered only a slight knee injury, grimacing in pain, but trying to appear tough. "I'm fine, just a scratch." Laura looked at him, her eyes both angry and worried. "Stubborn fool! Get that wound checked right now." The building was temporarily sealed off. George opened the door to his small apartment, a place few had ever stepped into, for everyone to shelter overnight. It had just a living room and a bedroom, tidy and warm with a bookshelf and a few potted plants. Laura was surprised. "Didn't expect your place to be this cozy." George smiled modestly. "A bachelor's home. Few things, but it has to stay neat or it gets messy fast." They quickly settled in. Nina helped George hand out blankets to elderly residents resting in the hallway. Laura cooked some hot porridge. Henry sat in a corner, bandaging his knee, both in pain and embarrassed. The cramped space forced the four of them to live close together. A rushed, late-night meal was served, thin porridge, some bread, and a few relief cartons of milk. Laura ladled a bowl for Henry with a sigh. "You keep clinging to your pride, now you finally sit down to eat, huh?" Henry mumbled, Thank you." George and Nina divided up chores, mopping up spilled water, laying blankets on the floor for others to rest. Nina smiled softly when she saw George clumsily folding bedding, but still patient. "You're handier than I thought." "Not as handy as you, but do it often enough and you get used to it," George replied with kind eyes. That night, none of the four slept much. Sirens, chatter, the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes. Laura leaned against the wall, watching Henry doze fitfully, his aged face clearly revealed under the yellow lamp. Her heart softened. However ridiculous his antics had been, he was still the man who'd walked through half a lifetime with her. The next morning, the building still wasn't open for residents to return. They had to keep staying at George's apartment. Living together sparked plenty of awkward yet funny moments. In the morning, Laura got up early to make coffee, but George had already prepared hot water and bread. Henry limped out, frowned when he saw Laura chatting cheerfully with George, and insisted on making coffee himself, even though he didn't know how to use the machine. Result, coffee foam overflowed all over the table. Laura cleaned up, both annoyed and amused. "Will it kill you to let someone else handle it?" "I just wanted to help," Henry snapped, ears turning red. At noon, Nina suggested making vegetable soup for a light meal. George chopped vegetables neatly, Laura seasoned perfectly, while Henry insisted on adding butter and bacon for strength. In the end, the soup turned into a strange mix, but everyone ate heartily. Hunger makes anything taste good. At night, sleeping arrangements became an issue. The apartment had only one bed and a small sofa. George offered the bed to Laura and Nina, but Laura refused right away. "I can sleep on the floor. Don't be so formal." Henry interjected. "No way. Your back hurts. I'll take the floor." "Your knee's freshly bandaged." Laura shot him a glare. Finally, they agreed. Laura and Nina shared the bed. Henry took the sofa. George spread a thin mattress on the floor. Late at night, Henry shifted painfully, and Laura quietly got up to adjust his pillow. He opened his eyes, catching that look, no longer reproach, just genuine concern. Henry whispered, "You still care about me, huh?" Laura replied curtly, "Go to sleep. We've got cleaning to do tomorrow." But her voice trembled slightly, and Henry noticed. On the second day, good news arrived. The fire was under control, but it would take several days to repair the water and electrical systems. While other residents found temporary lodging, the four of them kept living together. Henry gradually realized that flashy things meant nothing when facing danger. New suits, designer shoes, perfume, all useless in smoke and fire. Only Laura's hand gripping his when he slipped, and George's voice calling out to Nina in the choking hallway, truly mattered. Once, Henry tried to show off his expensive watch to impress Nina, but Laura just glanced at him. "Can that watch measure your wife's heartbeat when you fell?" Henry was speechless and shoved the watch into his pocket. Meanwhile, George and Nina grew closer after hours of working together to help other residents, distributing food, water, and escorting small children to safety. Nina said, "You really are reliable, not just a night guard." George scratched his head, embarrassed. "I just do what needs to be done, nothing more." Laura overheard this and couldn't help smiling. At least this man's more honest than Henry. On the third evening, they cooked a more proper dinner together. Spaghetti with tomato sauce, a simple salad. For the first time in days, Henry didn't argue over anything, just quietly washed the dishes after the meal, even though his hands still trembled with joint pain. Laura noticed and felt moved, though she said nothing. That night, when everyone was asleep, Henry sat alone at the small apartment window, looking down at the empty street. He thought back to the days he spent showing off, doing everything to win Nina's favor just to feed his pride. He asked himself, "What am I chasing? And Laura, all these years she's been right beside me, worrying over every little thing. How could I have been so foolish?" The next morning, when the apartment complex announced it would soon reopen, Henry spoke up to Laura. "I think, when we get home, I'll give up that gym membership." Finally admitting defeat? Laura raised an eyebrow. "Not defeat." Henry smiled gently. "I just realized there's no need to run far to find what matters most." Laura fell silent, hiding a smile. That afternoon, residents were allowed back to their apartments. George tidied up his small room, preparing to see everyone off. Nina held his hand, thanking him sincerely. "You're truly a good man." "This place is much warmer than I imagined." George just smiled. "It's warm because of the people who've been here." Henry stood behind, hearing it all, no longer jealous as before. He just felt relieved. In the end, everyone was safe. More importantly, he now knew that glitz and pride mean nothing when faced with danger. Only real affection, real family are worth holding on to. On the morning the building reopened, Laura and Henry cleaned their apartment. After several days living with George and Nina, both were far quieter. Henry wiped dust while awkwardly searching for words, while Laura stayed silent, as if deliberately making him speak first. Finally, Henry dropped the rag and sat down. Laura, I want to talk. Seriously. Laura glanced at him, arms crossed. Well, that's rare to hear. Go on, I'm listening. Henry swallowed, his voice deep. I've realized, these past months I've been foolish. Always chasing pride, trying to prove to you, to everyone, that I'm still stylish, still worth loving. But deep down, I was just afraid of being left behind. Laura paused, surprised by his honesty. Afraid of being left behind? She asked slowly. Yes. Henry nodded. Old age comes too fast. My eyes are weak, my legs unsteady, and trendy things no longer suit me. When I looked at Nina, young, cheerful, she reminded me of who I used to be. But when the fire happened, when I fell, the one who worried about me wasn't Nina. It was you. Laura was silent for a moment, then gave a soft laugh. So you finally looked straight into the mirror. I'm sorry, Laura. Henry bowed his head. I promise I'll change. Be less impulsive. Stop making a fool of myself. If there's still a chance, I want to live properly with you, not just to show off to others. Laura looked at her husband for a long moment, her eyes both stern and gentle. You're planning to live better for me? Don't. Live better for yourself. I don't want a husband acting virtuous. Then she smiled, a soft smile. But, all right, consider yourself forgiven. Henry sighed with relief, his mouth twisting. Forgiven, but still throwing jabs. What, you expect me to build a shrine praising you? Laura smirked, then handed him a bottle of knee ointment. Come on, rub this on before it swells. You're as clumsy as a child. That afternoon, Nina and George met in the apartment garden. Nina brought a small basket of flowers, planning to replant the scorched pots after the fire. George helped loosen the soil, the air calm and quiet. Thank you for these past few days, Nina said softly. I've lived alone for a long time, rarely feeling cared for. At this age, everyone thinks we have to be strong, never complain. Me too. George nodded. Sometimes I'm sad and have no one to tell. People think when you're old, you no longer need love, no longer need attention. But that's not true. Nina glanced at him. You're very considerate. Not like Henry, always putting on a show, but genuine, simple. George smiled gently. Simple because I choose to live that way. In truth, I'm not just a security guard. Nina was surprised. What do you mean? George spoke slowly. I own a small company, just over a dozen employees, doing logistics. I'm not in need, but I got tired of meetings and client dinners, so I handed things over to my son and took this job for fun. Here, no one flatters me. No one pesters me for loans. I can just be myself. Nina laughed. No wonder you're so calm. Turns out you're a hidden tycoon. Tycoon? Not at all. George waved it off. I just want a peaceful life. They both fell silent for a few seconds, listening to the evening birds. Nina murmured, yes, when you're old, everyone wants peace. But peace without someone to talk to is lonely too. George looked at her, eyes kind. If you ever need someone to talk to, just call me. I'll always be there. Nina flushed slightly, then laughed it off. No wonder the ladies here all like you. Late in the day, Laura and Henry happened to see this scene while on a walk. Laura glanced at her husband. See? Real care doesn't need flashy gestures. Henry scratched his head, not arguing. That evening, Henry disappeared for a while, then returned home with a small bouquet of pale roses. No fancy wrapping, no flashy ribbons, just a simple bunch. Laura widened her eyes. What's this? Showing off again? Henry handed over a little card, the handwriting shaky. After everything, I still choose you. Laura read it and her eyes blurred for a moment. She pretended to scold. Handwriting this ugly and you still dare give it to me? I'm old, my hands shake. Henry laughed awkwardly. But the words are true. Laura took the bouquet, said nothing more, and quietly placed it in a vase. When she turned back, Henry was still standing there, like a boy waiting to be praised. Laura shook her head slightly, but her lips curved into a smile. All right, old man, I'll take it. But don't think I'm that easy. You'll need to prove yourself for a long time. Sure, even for a lifetime. Henry replied, his voice lighter. The next day, all four of them gathered in the apartment lobby, the first time after the incident without any tension. George brewed tea, Nina brought cookies, Laura and Henry sat side by side. No one said it outright, but their eyes were different now. Less suspicion, less pride, more understanding. Laura turned to Nina. "Thank you for putting up with my husband these past months." Nina smiled. "He's quite endearing, just a bit theatrical." Henry scratched his head in embarrassment, while George chuckled. The conversation was lively, sprinkled with light jokes. At the end, George suddenly said, "Old age isn't an ending. It's just a new chapter, written differently. We can write it with laughter. It doesn't have to be all sighs." Nina nodded in agreement. "Yes. As long as there's someone to listen and share, old age can be just as beautiful as any other stage of life." Laura looked at Henry with a faint smile. "Did you hear that? She's talking to you." Henry responded with a sincere nod. The lobby echoed with the laughter of the four of them. Laughter no longer carrying jealousy or pride, only the warmth of people growing old together, realizing that the most precious thing isn't becoming young again, but not being lonely. After the fire, the apartment building returned to peace. The hallways were repainted, the burnt smell was gone, but those who had gone through the incident were completely changed. No longer the stubborn, headstrong elders they used to be. Henry now boasted far less. Instead of wearing flashy suits or showing off new watches, he chose simple shirts and took Laura by the hand for morning walks. He still liked buying flowers, but no longer huge bouquets the size of half a person, just a few roses in the vase on the dining table, and every time he washed the vase and changed the water himself. Laura chuckled to herself without saying a word, but inside she felt relieved. One afternoon, Laura visited Nina. Nina's apartment was now filled with hanging orchids and bougainvillea she tended herself. "I decided to love myself more," Nina said brightly, handing Laura a cup of tea. "No need to wait for someone to bring me joy. I can find it on my own." Laura nodded. "That's right. A woman at any age deserves love. But first, she must love herself." Nina laughed. "Luckily for that little commotion, it made me realize Henry suits you, and I suit myself." Both burst out laughing. Meanwhile, George still worked as the security guard but no longer kept his distance. He often dropped by Henry and Laura's place for tea, sharing funny stories from his shift. Henry was no longer awkward or jealous. Instead, he treated George as a friend. "Turns out you can still make close friends even in old age," Henry said once as the three men sat outside, snacking on sunflower seeds. "I used to think this age was only about counting pills." George patted his shoulder. "Don't count pills. Count your joys instead." Laura overheard and glanced at Henry. "See? Listen to the man." Henry smiled gently without arguing. On Sunday, Nina suggested holding a small tea party in the apartment lobby, a fire survival celebration. Everyone eagerly pitched in. Henry bought flowers, Laura baked cakes, Nina prepared tea, and George helped arrange tables and chairs. The gathering wasn't fancy, just a few round tables with cookies and fruit, but the atmosphere was as lively as a festival. Other residents joined in, delighted to see the four people who had been involved in romantic rumors now sitting together, laughing as if nothing had happened. Laura raised her teacup, half serious, half joking. "Well then, today I declare a complete ceasefire. No more spying, no more suspicion. If you want to give flowers, give flowers. If you want tea, drink tea. Just don't hide any secret funds." The whole lobby burst into laughter. Henry laughed too and nodded. "I surrender unconditionally. From now on, there's only one goal: live happy, live healthy, and live true to each other." George added, "That's right. Happiness in old age doesn't come from money or fancy clothes, but from having someone to share every meal, every little story with." Nina raised her cup. "Then let's promise, we won't let any of us be lonely." The four clinked teacups, their laughter mingling with the sweet scent of pastries. When the party ended, everyone left slowly, reluctant to go. Laura and Nina tidied up tables and chairs while chatting about new senior dance classes. George and Henry carried out the trash, then sat down to rest, talking about football and back pain in old age. The scene carried no tension at all, only camaraderie. The next morning, as the sun rose, Henry quietly rolled out a yoga mat on the balcony. He had learned a few poses during his failed midlife comeback phase, and now he wanted to practice again. This time, not to show off, but for his health. He carefully stretched, trying to hold a warrior pose, but his knees trembled. Laura stood behind the glass door, arms crossed, hiding a laugh. When Henry bent down to touch his toes but ended up touching his knees instead, she burst out laughing. Planning to compete in the Olympic yoga team? Henry jumped, almost falling, quickly bracing himself on the floor. "I'm just keeping fit," he muttered defensively. Laura stepped out, putting on a cardigan. "Practicing alone is risky. Let me join you for fun." Henry's eyes widened. "You know yoga? I'll learn if I don't." Laura shrugged and did a simple stretch. "But remember, practice is practice. Don't turn it into a performance." The two of them exercised under the morning sun. Every so often, Laura burst out laughing when Henry wobbled like a tree in the wind, trying to keep his balance. Their laughter carried down the hallway, making passing neighbors smile. It was a morning that marked the start of a new rhythm. No more one-upmanship, no more jealousy, just genuine affection and quiet companionship. Henry no longer wanted to show off to anyone, and Laura felt her heart soften. Nina grew more confident, joining community activities, while George still manned the apartment gate with his gentle smile, but now often stopped by friends' homes, no longer keeping his distance. They had all learned one lesson. Happiness in old age isn't found in pride or material things, but in having someone willing to sit beside you, pour you a cup of tea, and laugh together at life's little absurdities. And on the small balcony of apartment 302, Laura and Henry still practice yoga every morning, not to grow young again, but to stay healthy and joyful, walking hand in hand down the rest of life's road, always smiling.